Hello, at Guanawaradu, se waguego, gasto suruguate niangat. We're starting a new section of our newsletter in the Osaraze in the new year. And here's my little tiny apartment in the Northeast somewhere. And the new section is doing reviews from an Indigenous perspective of books, of movies, of exhibitions, art exhibitions. If you have any suggestions, just let us know and we'll check it out. I'd love to review things. And so we're going to start out with a book that is from 2019. It's called Our History is the Future, Standing Rock versus the Dakota Access Pipeline. And it's published by Verso Books, and it's by Nick Estes, who is Lakota. He's a citizen of Oceti-Sakowin and a historian. And this is a very personal book for him, but it's very historic. It goes back to look at resistance on the plains at the heart of Turtle Island back in the day, and then at Standing Rock water protection actions in 2016 and 2017. And any of you who know me know that I was a part of those protection actions and made a bunch of films out there and did, Facebook Lives. And it was such an important engagement. There are protests all over the world brought by Indigenous people. That one was especially important because it brought people in, it brought Sami people in, it brought Maori people in, and it reminded us as Indigenous people who we are and who the other Indigenous nations are. It's like the Aztecs would show up in their beautiful feathers, and then there were hakas by the Maori, and it just reminded us of who we are and what connects us as Indigenous nations. I think that was a really important part of it. Just as a reset, the Dakota Access Pipeline was the reason that Standing Rock called Indigenous nations and non-Indigenous allies out to Standing Rock, because it was going to be a 1,172 mile oil pipeline from the Bakken oil fields in North Dakota all the way to Illinois, and going under many rivers, waterways, and especially north of Standing Rock under the Missouri River and Lake Oahe. So that is a dammed part of the Missouri River. And that pipeline had been set to go north of Bismarck, which is about, I'm guessing 20 miles north of Standing Rock, which is, one of the biggest cities in North Dakota. And the people of Bismarck said, no way, that's going to contaminate our water. So we're not going to do it. So they were pushing it through on the Indigenous people. Unfortunately, that is a history, and that is a reality all over. So this book tracks the history of Standing Rock and describes what happened out there, but also this history of resistance and protest out on the plains. We had the buffalo slaughter out there, and there were many wars that happened out there. If you look at our latest Aunties, Dandelion podcast, Rebecca Kemble and I, who also helped me produce our Standing Rock documentary, remember our auntie, Jermaine Tremmel, who was from Standing Rock. We sat with her as she was passing on to the next world. And we had such engagement with her when we were out there. And she described to us that there were floods, like when Standing Rock would not comply with what the federal government was doing out there with the dams, which they did all over North America, and everywhere. They would flood the land, and they did threaten that on us as protesters, water protectors, who were there to try to stop this pipeline from coming through. Just a really seminal moment in my own life. What I love about the Nick Estes book is that it would be so easy, and it has been very easy, for people to examine this water protection action from a very violent perspective because there was so much violence. I mean, there's no way you can leave out the violence when you're telling that story. But he does so much more. It's about the history of resistance. It's about the history of this group of people that were so full of ceremony and teachings and strength that they've been around. They've been doing this. And so our history is also our future. They're still at it. And like I said, this was an act of sovereignty as much as it was an act of protecting that water. The other thing that happened out there was that when Standing Rock would identify historic and traditional sites and ceremonial sites so that the pipeline would not bust through those, that's exactly what the pipeline would do. So they're like, why should we identify where this is? They came in a very cruel way. There was a lot of cruelty and a lot of violence that was out there. So, in thinking about the way that we tell stories in Indigenous country, what I saw out at Standing Rock is people always wanted to see the feathers. They always wanted to see Indigenous people as like the poors, right? They couldn't almost hear, they couldn't get in their ears this story that Indigenous people were leading. Indigenous people had this wisdom. Indigenous people were rising. That was something that is so not part of, and I'm talking about like New York Times reporters. They couldn't get it. They couldn't get it. And it's because, there's an enormous amount of propaganda about Indigenous people and keeping us in that place. People like to be like, oh, I helped them. It's like, no, that's not really what happened. So the other reason that I wanted to bring this to you now, I just read it and I had put it off since, 2019. I knew of this book for a long time and I really was like, I can't do it. It's too triggering. I know, I kind of knew, so never do that. I kind of was like, oh, I know what this is going to be. It's going to be people getting arrested. It's all the sadness. It's all the cruelty. It is not that. It is this really responsible historical account of how the Lakota, Dakota, Nakota people on the plains, this is what they do, and they have done it well and successfully. And also, one of the most beautiful things, and this is what I've said since Standing Rock, is that he describes, this gathering. At times it was 10,000 people that came together and camped, and there was free food, and there were, a bunch of kitchens, 5 different kitchens, at last that I counted. People were butchering bison and then distributing them and then showing us how to tan the hides and what happens to all the rest of the bison. West Coast tribes brought their canoes out and they canoed the Missouri River from Bismarck to Standing Rock, which was gorgeous. And they were carving their paddles as they were there. It's just like these cedar canoes. They had revived their traditions of cedar canoes and they trailered them out from the West Coast and then had this moment of the paddle to Standing Rock. And you can check that out too. I did a piece for Yes Magazine on the paddle to Standing Rock. So you can check that out as well. So one thing that I do love about the way that Nick Estes treats this, he does reference a Kahnawake Mohawk scholar, Audra Simpson, and she talks about the refusal, which is really interesting. It's the refusal to accept, I'm reading from, I don't know what page this is, 248 maybe? The refusal to accept the impossible condition of banishment and disappearance from one's homeland and outright dispossession. There's that refusal, but there's also that coming back. So I like that he's quoting Mohawk scholars. But then he goes on to say, what do you fill that with? What do you fill that refusal with? And Estes goes on to say, no DAPL, which was that hashtag Dakota Access Pipeline, right? No DAPL, offered a brief vision of what a future premised on Indigenous justice would look like. Free food, free education, free healthcare, justice, The no DAPL, then this is page 253. The no DAPL camps didn't just imagine a future without settler colonialism and the oppressive institution of the state, but created that future in the here and now. Really important, because people will say that was not a successful protest. It was not a successful protection action because that water is flowing under the Missouri River. It's still in play though, because in 2025, the environmental impact statement is still being engaged and will go to a higher court through the Army Corps of Engineers. Those lawsuits are not finished, even though that oil has been running. He's looking at that as that oil is running, but we found, and we found each other as kin. You know, that's what I've said since we returned from Standing Rock. We found each other and we made kin with each other. We made family. I'm getting emotional. We made family with each other out at Standing Rock. And those relationships continue, and it has shored all of us up. The people that I met out at Standing Rock, the people that you'll see in our film, The Eagle and the Condor, from Standing Rock with Love, that Rebecca Kemble and I put together. And we focus on ceremony. You know, how does ceremony shore up your ways of protecting land and water? How do those things affect each other, right? Yeah, sure, you can say the oil is running, but what happened is what Rick Estes is so good at doing is realizing they had the most amazing porta potties out at Standing Rock, you know, and we would be there and see trucks of salmon come in from the West Coast. The canoe tribes were gifting the salmon. People brought their gifts, they put it into the greater good. And even like the first day that I was at Standing Rock, you know, it was September. I didn't think it was going to be cold, and I was standing up on what was called Facebook Hill, and somebody came up to me and they're like, you're not going to make it. It's too cold. And they just handed me a beautiful down jacket. That was the spirit of Standing Rock. The drone pilots were bringing this new technology at that point. I'm not sure I had really seen a drone before I went out there. They were rolling out that technology, and that was so important to track the course of the pipeline. So just a remarkable take. And Nick Estes, good for you. You know, because it's such a more complete description of who we are as Indigenous people, how we can live together without this overlay of the overculture of, you know, capitalism, blah, blah, blah. It can happen because we made it happen out there. So take a look at this book and let me know how these reviews work for you. If you have suggestions, is it too long? I don't know. I know people like things fast, and I like the deep dive. We just appreciate you so much. We just have loved being part of the Aunties Dandelion and bringing you these stories of Indigenous change makers. So stay in touch, come back, and give us your feedback. Okay. Love you guys. Bye-bye.